follow traffic, clear visual approach, runway 4 right, maintain 17 John Austin, 5 mile final. 17 till 5 out.
A fascinating discussion about leadership, teamwork, and inspiration. From the National Business Aviation Association, this is Flight Plan. I'm Rob Finfrock with your trusted source for the latest business aviation news and information. The 2023 NBAA Leadership Conference took place recently in Charlotte, North Carolina, and certainly one of the highlights from that record-setting event was a keynote presentation by Dr. Sian Proctor, geoscientist, explorer, artist, and commercial astronaut. In September of 2021, Dr. Proctor joined Haley Arsenault, Christopher Sombrosky, and Mission Commander Jared Isaacman as pilot of the Inspiration 4 orbital spaceflight on board the SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule Resilience. Following that keynote, which built upon her earlier appearance at the 2021 edition of NBAA Base, Dr. Proctor sat down for a live onstage recording of the Learning Leader podcast, hosted by Ryan Hawk in his second Leadership Conference appearance in as many years. We're pleased now to bring you a few excerpts from that hour-long discussion. We'll begin with Dr. Proctor's thoughts on what it takes to build a team.
So you tell us that you meet these random strangers, and 6 months later, you're taking off on a rocket and you have to live together for a few days. You have to make sure you keep each other alive. I mean, there's a lot going on. I thought from an applicable takeaway for all of us is you had to develop immense trust in those people. How did you do it? What are the ways that, because I think this can be useful for all of us. What are some ways you develop trust really quickly? And trust sometimes takes a long time. In your case, you guys did it in 6 months.
You know, that's a really good question. And a lot of that is spending time together.
Yeah.
And so when you go and have experiences, experiential learning is what I call it, where you go out and you do something that's challenging and it bonds you in a way that gives you commonality, a place where you can go back to. And so one of the things that we did was we hiked Mount Rainier together as a crew, and I'm a geoscientist. I've hiked the Grand Canyon rim to rim in a day. Let me tell you, I learned that I am not a mountaineer.
Really?
Yeah, and I do not like hiking in snow. And so, but it was such a challenge for us to get there. And then we get to the base camp, Camp Muir, and we're cold, we're tired. One of my crew members is throwing up. It was just exhausting. And then we wake up the next day and it's a beautiful sunny day and you're just so happy to be there and together. But we worked as a team to get through. At the end I had my backpack on, and you don't want to show weakness. This is at the beginning, and you're carrying your backpack. And then if you watch the Netflix series, at the end Jared has 2 backpacks on. He took mine, tied it to his, and carried it the rest of the way up the mountain. And being able to be vulnerable and say, I'm struggling, and your crew member saying, let me help you. And then taking that weight off of you so that as a crew you can be successful. So there's vulnerability, there's trust, there's all of these things, and knowing that when you show that vulnerability, you're not going to be penalized for it. That you're going to work as a crew to solve the situation that's immediately right in front of you so you can be successful.
So the takeaway for anybody trying to build a team is let's go find a mountain and climb it together. Is that all I'm hearing? Right?
Yep. Anything extreme.
There is something though. There's something to that. Think about like the best teams you've been a part of, whether it's in business or sports, of doing hard things together. Right? That's when you have to be vulnerable. You're like, I need some help.
That's
right?
correct.
And you probably grew from that experience to when it was over. I mean, I would imagine you guys grew a lot together.
And there are things that we all have our own thing to contribute. And so even though I might have been struggling at the end with my backpack, I had Haley and I was in front of her and I was like, just step in my shoes, where I'm putting my foot, that was one of the things. Or checking in with each other and being like, hey, how are you doing? Are you okay? And because at first you're just like, no, I'm great. I can do this. But once you're together, you realize, you say, I'm struggling here. And being able to know that you learn that you've got each other's back
through those experiences.
I think of this phrase of we need to be a good teammate. I think I have a sports background, but this is very similar whether you're playing hockey or you're flying in a rocket and you're going to space or you're leading a business or a company. It is very helpful to be a good teammate. Yep. What are some of the qualities and the behaviors of somebody like you and those you surround yourself with to be a good teammate?
One of the things about, that I've learned, and a lot of this started with, I grew up playing sports, but then also going into living in Moon and Mars simulations, doing the high seas habitat for 4 months. And again, that was with basically 5 other strangers, so there's 6 of us. And I learned a lot about myself during that. And then I also did a reality TV show called The Colony back in 2010, where I lived for 2 months in a post-apocalyptic world and with strangers. People, they drop you in. It was truly a reality TV show where you're like, what am I doing? And navigating those spaces, I really learned a lot about myself and how to be a good crew member or teammate. And one of the things was when you're comfortable with sharing who you are. Like, are you a morning person? Do you need your coffee? What are your strengths? I'm really good at these things. Not what are your weaknesses? What are your strengths? What do you bring to the table? And I think that that's so important that when Inspiration 4 came together, I reached out to Jared and I said, Jared, my school is a strength school. All of the students and the faculty, we all know what our strengths are. I'd love to take and bring this to our crew. And so I made them take the Strengths Finders assessment, and then I mapped it all out so that we could see where we aligned and where we had gaps and how we could communicate in that system. So being able to understand yourself and your tendencies, I think are important. But then also is knowing what gets on your nerves, right? Yeah. Sometimes, like living in the high seas habitat, one of my friends, at the end, she wrote a book and she was talking about how the way one person walked down the stairs just annoyed her, and after 4 months, you can imagine. But this is with space travel. These are real concerns. Yeah. Like the way somebody might chew or the way, just who they are over time could really grate you. Yeah. And so then how do you deal with that? And what we've learned from living in Moon and Mars simulations is that you can't avoid conflict, whether you're on a team, a crew, within a family. Conflict is going to arise. It's the skills that you were given to be able to mitigate that conflict. So when it does arise, it doesn't tear the crew apart. It doesn't tear the team apart.
More in a moment after a quick message from NBAA.
NBAA Flight Plan listeners, your podcast is ready everywhere. You can download it from iTunes, ask your smart speaker to give you a listen, or hear it in any car with Apple's CarPlay. NBAA Flight Plan, available anytime, anywhere.
We're back now with the discussion between Dr. Sian Proctor and the Learning Leader podcast host Ryan Hawk from this year's NBAA Leadership Conference. We'll pick up that conversation now as Ryan asks Dr. Proctor about what inspired her own spirit of adventure that ultimately led her into low Earth orbit.
You're an explorer. You've been to all 7 continents. I was watching your videos on Instagram of you and Haley going to Antarctica. What is it about wanting to explore, not only in space, but you explored our entire planet as well? What is it about wanting to get to all the continents? Why do that?
As a little girl, I loved it when my dad would just be like, get in the car, we're going for a Sunday drive. And I would be like, okay, and I'd jump in the back and I'd have the map, before GPS. And I would always have our map out, and I was trying to figure out where we were and then looking out at the beautiful scenery and just how beautiful our world is. And so as an early age, I was always out in the woods. I was always running around, hiking and doing things and fishing and just loving nature. And so for me, when it comes to exploring and going to places I've never been before, it helps me grow. It broadens my mind. It fuels my soul. And I saw going to space as an extension of that. And so when I think about going to Antarctica, it was this world I could never imagine. Like as a geoscientist, I know that there's these giant glaciers and stuff, but to see the volume of water
And to see these beautiful penguins trying to survive and the whales and all of that, it just makes me think about humanity and our responsibility, our role in what is happening to our planet. And even from that orbital perspective, because all of this is about perspective. Wherever you travel and the people you interact with. And this is why I talk about dynamic leadership over time and space, because you change. With these experiences, you change. And when you change, that gives you an opportunity to grow and to think about how you're not only living your life, but how you're impacting others and those around you. And when I think about our planet, and I think about how we are determining the destiny of that, how do we work towards being better?
When I think of you, I actually think of the word excellence as far as everything that you've done, a wide span of things. And you've also not only done it yourself and exhibited those qualities, but you surrounded yourself with others who have sustained excellence. What have you found to be some of the commonalities among leaders who have sustained excellence over an extended period of time?
I made the conscious decision, and this was in college. I made the conscious decision to try to surround myself with people who inspire me. And when they inspire me, hopefully I'm also inspiring them. But when you walk into a room and you're surrounded by people who just bring out positive energy in you, that they're inspiring, they're hopeful, they're imaginative, they're creative, it changes you to want to be the same. And a lot of times in organizations, you don't have a choice, right? You're kind of given a hodgepodge of people that you're working with. But within that, it's like, how do you set a culture of inspiration? And of course, a Jedi space is part of that, because if you can create a Jedi space that fuels creativity and inspiration, then you want to come to work. You love your colleagues. You're like, man, I want to come here and hang out with you guys because you're bringing out the best in me.
Seeing the video of you splashing down and then you dancing off it, which is really cool. But then what happens? Like you're just back to normal life, or like how does it impact you? What do you do next? Where do you go from there? You've just been to like the pinnacle. I don't know how you move on from that.
Hard transition.
Yeah.
It is a hard transition because again, it's about finding your crew, and then you get this crew that's amazing. Like you're loving hanging out with them. It's challenging. You're being challenged personally. You're challenging each other to rise to excellence and take on this mission. You splash down, you celebrate, and then it's like, see you later.
Really? You're on your way.
You're on your way. And you get home, literally, a week later, you got your bag and you get to your apartment and you sit down and you're like, what do I do now?
How do I top that?
What's next?
Yeah.
And it's not easy. And what I realized is that it's all about finding your next crew. And so I put a lot of time and energy because, there's some depression that happens from that because you're like, man, it's over. Why is it over? I want to linger. I want to stay in this moment. But, change happens and you sit there and you're like, okay, how do I move forward in a healthy, productive way? And I realized I had to find my crew. And I thought, well, what crew do I want to be around? And I decided that it was artists, it was creatives. And I started hanging out with musicians and other artists, and I did it, and I signed up for an artist in residency with a company called Subtractive, and I purposely went into, again, pulling out that creativity in myself and finding a crew that would help and support and we could inspire each other.
What kind of doors have opened for you because of your willingness to, one, put yourself out there, be selected, right, go up into space, come back? Like what kind of doors have opened for you?
And that's the interesting thing about opportunity. When you say yes to opportunity, it opens up doors you never ever imagined. And for me, I've seen that every single time. When I step through one door, all of these other doors open. And I love options. And so one of the big things is being on the National Space Council Users Advisory Group under Vice President Harris. And so that was something that I never I never would have thought that I'd be doing that and sitting at that table, but now here I am. And another one is I got a fellowship at Arizona State University, my alma mater, where they are supporting me as an artist in residence and creating new art in a fabrication lab. Again, I never thought that I would be doing these things.
Yeah, what does art mean to you? Why is that an important focus of yours now?
I have spent my entire career as a scientist, and what happens is you tend to get tracked either one way or another. And back in the day, when I was a kid, you're either good at science and math, or you're arts and business, or something else over here. And I love being a scientist. I've loved my career of learning about geology and how our planet works and all of that. But I was also the kid that was always looking over at the people at the art side and being like, what's going on over there? I wish I had some talent in that area.
Yeah.
And thinking like, I don't have any talent. And then discovering that creativity during COVID and realizing that we are all creative. Every day we do and make decisions about the world around us. And I realized that when I found art and poetry, I also found flow. How many of you know flow, when you get into a state of flow? And so this is really great research to think about, but it's when you're doing something and time dissipates. It goes away because you're so into what it is that you're doing, and you're loving what you're doing so much that you forget to eat, you forget that, hours pass and you're like, whoa, wait, no, you come out of it and you're like, wow, that was amazing. And what I realized is that when I was doing art, I was going into these flow states, and it was meditative, it was, this really kind of healthy release that I was experiencing.
As the conversation then shifted to questions from the audience, Dr. Proctor turned the tables a bit on Ryan.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
So when you think about your creative endeavor and your creative story, what made you decide to do what you're doing?
Thank you for asking that. A deep curiosity about people and their stories. Mm-hmm. So I got my MBA and my company paid for it, and I felt like I was wasting time by not going back to school, but I didn't love all of the formal aspects of graduate school, and instead said, what if I could choose my own professors? People like you, honestly, choose my own professors who have lived extraordinary lives, who could tell great stories. If I could choose my own and then follow my curiosity, ask them questions, who knows what could happen? And that started 8+ years ago now, 500 of these things. And I think there's a lot to be said for following your genuine curiosity with great rigor. And if you do that, you may end up on a stage with someone like you, which I could have never imagined. So it's pretty wild.
But you think about the fact that you took the time to have that conversation with yourself.
Right, yeah.
And that's what a lot of times when we're talking about whether it's combating, imposter syndrome or at opportunity, it really all begins with the conversation you're having with yourself.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I love it. Okay, we have so few women pilots in our industry, and they're often under the microscope, and like you feel they carry all women pilots on their shoulders. What advice can you give to them, and perhaps more so to their male peers and supervisors?
Oh, for the male peers and supervisors, be active allies.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is be supportive, have empathy, check in, and support the formation of working groups where they can find community. Because when you have community, you have support. And so how do you create community within your industry or within your company for the different groups that are there? But also, and create a Jedi space. But when you have these communities that are getting together, you've got to ask them, how can we support you? But also, how can we make it so that we also are a larger community coming together and working together so that we're not only supporting these smaller communities within, but the larger organization can thrive and become a community that supports each other.
Let's do one more. What was the greatest lesson learned having finally achieved commercial space flight in this lifetime?
I think that the greatest lesson learned for me is the world is changing fast because of digital technology. In 2019, NASA put out a call for astronauts. And a lot of my friends, sent me the call and said, hey, are you going to apply again? Are you going to apply? And I'm 49 years old. And I'm like, and this is what I said to them. I said, no, I don't think NASA is going to be my road to space, but maybe one day. And I'm thinking a decade, when I'm in my 80s, I'm like, maybe one day I'll be able to go up on commercial space. I had no clue it was 2 years away. No clue. And in that 2021, they launched a lot of people, suborbital and then us orbital, to space that were non-civil astronauts. And that trend is going to continue. A lot of times we hear stories like my dad living in the Apollo age, and how great it was because there was so much happening with, we were going to the moon. But now we're in this new space economy. And it's exciting what's coming down the pipeline. We have all of these startups that not only are regular civilians getting an opportunity to go to space, whether they win their opportunity or are gifted it, but then we have new low Earth orbit space stations that are designed for people like us to go. And I think that's exciting.
Exciting indeed. Be sure to check out the complete conversation between Ryan Hawk and Dr. Proctor at the Learning Leader website, learningleader.com/podcast. You may also learn more about Dr. Proctor at her website, drsianproctor.com. And for more tips and information about how to become an effective business aviation leader, visit nbaa.org/leadership. And that's the latest from the National Business Aviation Association. Remember, you can subscribe to all Flight Plan episodes at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts, including by asking your virtual assistant or connected device. Of course, you can also download Flight Plan directly from nbaa.org. I'm Rob Finfrock. Thanks for listening, and be sure to join us next time for a new episode of Flight Plan.
Right base, sending out 3500.
All right, we got him inside. We're slowing it back to 170, cover 5.